Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Emotional Intelligence, What It Is and Why It Matters. My name is Greg Farabee. I'm the Client Relations Manager for Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development. Our center specializes in providing employee development training for clients in Northeast Ohio and around the country. We offer programming as public enrollment programs delivered in Independence, Ohio, as well as on-site customized programs that can be delivered at your location. I'm joined today by Kent State facilitator Christy Frieden. I will be serving as your host, and Christy will be our presenter for the day. Everyone in attendance has been muted to avoid background noise from any of the over 250 registered participants. Despite having everyone on mute, we do encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions in writing using the control panel on the right side of your screen. I will present your questions to Christy as time permits throughout the webinar. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email with the link to the recording after we conclude our time together this morning. Without further ado, I'll pass the microphone to Christy Frieden.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you can join us. Sounds like we have quite a few people on the line today. So, talking about emotional intelligence. Again, I am a facilitator for Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development. I've been doing it for quite a while now. I guess it's been about 8 years. Emotional intelligence, I do have a wide variety of topics, but emotional intelligence seems to be pretty popular, and it seems to be gaining popularity as requested training. It is something that I'm passionate about. I enjoy, like sharing this information with people. So I hope you'll find this 1 hour to be helpful and gather some information that will be useful for you, both in your work environment and your home environment as well. So as we approach today's session, we're going to talk a little bit about what emotional intelligence is, we're going to define it, and why it's important. There's lots of research to back all of this up, so I'm going to share some of that with you. There are 4 components of emotional intelligence and related competencies, so we're going to go through some of that. And then how do you improve emotional intelligence? So that's what we will be discussing today. As Greg mentioned, please submit your questions. I would be happy to answer anything that comes up that I'm not fully covering for you, so certainly submit those. Okay, so let's begin. I like to say not utilizing your emotional intelligence skills is like driving your car without utilizing your rear view mirror. So when you think about utilizing your rear view mirror in your car, what are some of the things that you see? We certainly see things that we've passed. We see maybe sirens coming up on us, behind us. We see things to the side of us, but also occasionally, or maybe even kids in the back seat, but also we see ourselves, and that's really what emotional intelligence is in a nutshell. It's looking at ourselves, being aware of ourselves in relation to everyone and everything around us. So we need to be paying attention to how we interact with others, how we manage our relationships and get along with others, how we impact other people. Our emotions, as you'll find, really impact other people, and we're going to talk about how that is and ways that we can maybe be better at it. So emotional intelligence, by definition, is your ability to recognize and understand your emotions. So you have to understand yourself, and then your skill at using this awareness to manage yourself and manage your relationships. So some interesting information. So 70% of the difference between top performers in the work environment and average to poor performance all relates to their level of emotional intelligence. Your level of emotional intelligence is a bigger predictor of success in the workplace than your IQ. And you might think that that seems a little odd. Certainly you need a level of IQ to have the position that you have, but your level of emotional intelligence is what separates people who do very well in the workplace and people who don't. And luckily, we can improve our emotional intelligence just by paying attention and doing some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So just a little background on emotional intelligence. The term first appeared actually in the 1960s, but didn't really gain any much popularity until the 1990s, when a guy by the name of Daniel Goleman wrote a book about it, and that seemed to spark the whole movement. As I mentioned, it just seems in recent years to be continuing to gain popularity. I think it's because of some of our issues with technology, and that we're more, we're interacting more through technology oftentimes than we are face to face. And so I think our relationship building and our emotional intelligence and really being aware of what's going on has declined a bit. And so we need to be paying attention to all of this, and we need to work more, maybe even a little harder on developing relationships with others. So it just really is kind of a popular topic right now. As we look at the whole idea of our emotions, just look up on the screen of the cute babies there. Emotions are contagious. Emotions are contagious, and I know you've probably experienced this. So in our personal lives, I think one of the easiest ways and probably most relatable ways that we notice emotions being contagious is if you are watching a sporting event or you are playing sports. You can really see a momentum shift for a team based on emotions. And I always say if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, which I am, there could be a lot of anger and crying involved, okay? But we definitely are, we spread emotions. Emotions are contagious. So we take this idea and think about the workplace and how, someone comes in, they may be in a rotten mood, and how the mood can pass, through the office very, very quickly. If you are a leader, I want to tell you especially that you set the emotional tone for your team. People are naturally looking to you to set that tone. So if you are all over the place emotionally, that can be very, very challenging. So you come into work, you're in a good mood. Then you go to a meeting, you're in a bad mood. Then you get a phone call, then you're in a good mood. That's really hard for your employees to manage. So you need to be very cautious of that, and you intentionally need to set the right emotional tone. Be careful if you show your stress, because that's going to permeate through your entire office. And people who are negative. I mean, it's very hard to come in every day and work with someone who is negative and not take on that type of negativity. So our brain is what's considered an open loop system. And what that means is we are constantly scanning the environment to pick up on the emotional cues of others, whether we recognize we're doing it or not. It is a built-in survival mechanism. So think about moms and newborn babies. Obviously they can't talk. I mean, they can cry and make facial expression and things like that. And that's what, that's how they're expressing, emotion. And moms kind of just know what the baby needs. So it's just a built-in survival mechanism. So whether we recognize it or not, we are paying attention to facial expression, body language of others, and we can often pick up on their emotion before we even maybe consciously recognize it. So that's why it can be contagious, like the flu or a cold. It can be picked up and passed through a group very, very quickly. So when we take a look at, what the four components of emotional intelligence are, it's made up of four different areas. The area of self-awareness and self-management are what's considered our personal competencies, and then the area of social awareness and relationship management are what's considered our social competencies. And so when we take a look at what each one of these things are about, they're pretty self-explanatory. But just to give you a little further definition of each one, when we're self-aware, we are able to accurately recognize our emotions, which can be challenging, but accurately recognizing them and then kind of having a general understanding of how we tend to respond to different people in different situations. My personal belief is that self-awareness is key to this whole idea. I do a lot of facilitation and training. I also do a lot of executive coaching. I also do some mediation, and what I find in leaders especially is self-awareness is critical to being a great leader. And when you think about that, why would that be so important? Why would it be important for a leader to be self-aware? And, what it boils down to is when someone is self-aware, they're constantly kind of self-evaluating. They're recognizing, hey, I met with Joe, how did that go? Did the meeting go well? Could I have done something differently? Or I'm going to go meet with Sue now. I recognize that she likes a certain type of style or a way or an approach, and so I'm going to adjust myself accordingly. So I think self-awareness is huge and crucial. So not only with leaders, but I think with team members, with anybody, individual contributors in the workplace, self-awareness is key. Always being able to self-evaluate, recognizing kind of your responsibility in a social interaction is important. So it's one thing to know yourself, but a completely different thing to control yourself, and that's what self-management is. So we can become aware of ourselves, but then we have to manage ourselves. So essentially, we're choosing what we say and do very specifically in order to direct our behavior in a positive way. And this can be very, very challenging. And so we're going to talk a little bit throughout the morning about triggers and stress and all of that. So know yourself and control yourself. And then we move down to social awareness and relationship management. So these are what's considered our social competencies. So social awareness, what is it? It's essentially paying attention is what it is. It's looking up and paying attention, recognizing, understanding the emotions of others and perspectives of others. So it's paying attention to what's going on around us. And then finally, relationship management is utilizing everything that we know about ourselves and we know about others and managing our interactions successfully, taking responsibility for what we add to a relationship. So if you take a look at this four-part slide here, when you look at self-awareness and social awareness, you can think about it this way. So self-awareness and social awareness are things that we know, and self-management and relationship management are things that we do. Okay, so that's part of all of this. I'm paying attention, things that I know about myself and about others, and then as we manage these things, these are things that I'm doing or not doing to be successful. So I do have a question for you here. When we take a look at those four components, where do you think you are the strongest in the four areas? So if you can go ahead and answer that now, we can kind of take a look at what who we have and where they think they're the strongest.
All right, Christy, the count is coming in, and it looks like we have about 75% participation so far, and looks like we have a fairly even split, as we have almost everybody voted at this point. We have about 48%, 49% self-awareness, and 37% social awareness.
All right. Well, that's good. So I think a great place to start is self-awareness. I think we can always continue to grow and develop in that area. And as far as social awareness, again, that's another a good place to start, and paying attention to others. But then management, as I mentioned, is a completely different story. So knowing ourselves and knowing others is one thing. Controlling ourselves and making the right choice for interaction is another. And so we can work on all of these. So thanks for sharing your answers there. All right, so I have a little self-awareness quiz for you up on the screen. And so what I'd like you to think about now as I talk through all of this is when you're in a conversation that you find difficult. So think about maybe someone that you struggle with a little bit. So when you're in a conversation you find difficult, when do you become aware of the following? You're going to give yourself a score between 1 and 5. So 1 means immediately in the difficult conversation I become aware of this, through 5, and 5 means days later or not at all, it never even crosses my mind. So go ahead, I'm just going to give you a moment to kind of read through these 10 statements and just rate yourself quickly on each of them, putting yourself in a situation where, you know, it's a difficult conversation, and when do you become aware of some of these things that may be happening to you in the conversation. So as you go through it, I'm going to talk through some of these things and why it's so important. So when we talk about the whole idea of the need to relax your body, or how agitated you become, or even the idea about noticing the stress you feel. So, you know, 1s and 2s are good. If you scored yourself a 3 on any of them, you know, maybe have a little work to do. Any 4s and 5s, these are areas that you could probably improve upon, because the sooner that you become aware of these things, the better, the quicker you can do something about it. But when we talk about number 2, number 3, and number 4, you know, why would that be so important? Why would it be important for you to you know, relax your body, or notice how agitated you become, or even do something about the stress? And that is because when so much of our message is communicated through nonverbal body language. Actually, 55% of our message is communicated through our nonverbal body language. So we think about, you know, our facial expression. You know, we start becoming stressed, we get a grimace on our face, or we start clenching our fists, or the vein pops out of our forehead, or whatever it may be. And if you're not aware of that, you know, you're communicating that. Whether you're saying anything or not, you're communicating barriers in the conversation just by your nonverbal body language. And so that's why so important to kind of recognize if this is happening. So then you look at, you know, 5, communicating empathy. 6, others aren't sharing your goals or ideas. 7, you know, need to gain others' commitment. Even 9, the need to change your approach. I mean, all of these things are things, if we can catch them in the moment, we can do something about it and utilize a different approach. You know, and we can change our approach, but the problem becomes, especially when the conversation is difficult, we feel we're right, the other person's wrong, our ego ends up kicking in, and then we just want to win. We just want to prove we're right and the other person's wrong, and that's it. And even if you're arguing and the other person says, fine, whatever, you're right, and walks away, does that really mean that you've gained their commitment, or that you've changed their mind? Probably not. So it's important as we have these difficult interactions that we realize we can change our approach. We can change our approach if what we're doing is not working. And then we take a look at number 10, the need to show your sense of humor. I guess why this is so important is humor obviously can de-escalate a situation, but I will say it has to be appropriate. Okay, appropriate. I wouldn't recommend making fun of the other person. I would suggest maybe making a comment, kind of a comment about yourself or whatever to kind of de-escalate the situation, because it can be a tool, a very effective tool in de-escalating a situation. So this is just a couple statements to rate yourself and just some things to be paying attention to, especially during conversations that can be challenging. Okay. So, negative emotions. Why do we have negative emotions? They do serve a purpose in our lives. When you think about negative emotions, fear, hurt, anger, frustration, disappointment, guilt, regret, maybe feeling inadequate, hopeless, lonely, depressed, all of those things. They do have a purpose in our lives. And it really is, what it boils down to is a message to us that, hey, something's not right. I need to change what I'm doing so that I can move through these negative emotions and feel better. Essentially, when you think about fight or flight, okay, so I'm either going to stand here and fight or I'm going to flee. Negative emotions are a message that make us act. And it's interesting, and I'm sure you can recall a time where you got really, really angry with someone, and maybe you're having an argument and you're having trouble getting the words out or figuring out what to say, and then you leave, and maybe a couple hours later you said, oh, I should have said this or I should have said that, after you've maybe calmed down a bit. And that's because we're built in such a way, going back to fight or flight, that when we get really amped up in anger or fear, the blood drains from our brain and goes into our extremities to get us ready to fight or to flee. And so that's why our brain just doesn't work very well intellectually when we are taken over by negative emotions. And then once we calm down and get a little more rational, we can think a little better. So it's interesting that there is some obviously physiological effects on negative emotions to our body. So, again, it's just important to know. And oftentimes, you probably know people who are just stuck in negative emotions all the time. And that's just not a very good place to be. And so being stuck there, people who you interact with like that, you can try to talk to them, try to change their mind, but oftentimes they're just stuck there. And that it's not a good place for their coworkers, obviously, but just ultimately it's just not a very good place for individuals either, because it can have an impact on your physical health. But let's talk a little bit about happiness and positive emotions. If you want a reason to be more positive, here is some research. Now, there's a lot of research on positivity, the power of positivity, and here's just a couple of the research results. So, happy workers, more productive, higher sales, they get higher performance ratings, better job security. This last one, less sick days, quit or become burned out. Someone who is more negative takes an average of 1.25 sick days a month. And when you think about that, that's a lot of sick days in a year's time. But again, that tie between negativity and physical health is real. Was there a question, Greg?
Yes, there was. Stepping back to the previous slide with negative emotions, the question is, how do you deal with someone that they described as keyboard tough guy? someone who's aggressive or negative with their email or texting?
Interesting. Well, I guess my first thought would be not to get baited into anything. And I think as we go through this morning, just because someone does something to us doesn't mean we have to do it back to them. And I think sometimes people try to bait us into saying something or doing something. You can only allow yourself to be angry about it if you allow it. Other people aren't making us feel negative emotions. It's kind of the meaning that we put on it. Addressing this person in a calm, rational manner, maybe depending on who it is. But ultimately, you have to decide whether you're going to let it bother you or not. And I guess it really would all depend on who this person is to the person who asked the question, whether you have some type of whether they're supervisor, employee, or if it's just a peer. It would depend on how you would handle it. But ultimately, you have full and total control on how you're going to respond, and just try to respond in as calm and rational manner as you can, even though sometimes that can be difficult. So when we talk about positive emotions, there is a magic ratio of positive to negative emotions in order to be what they say flourishing in your life. If you think about it, in the past week, let's just give the past week, for example, would you say that you had more negative emotions? Would you say that it was kind of even, half and half, negative and positive? Or would you say you experienced more positive emotions? The magic ratio is actually 3 to 1. You need 3 positive emotions in your life as opposed to 1 negative emotion to be flourishing in your life. So it's important to really try to incorporate more positivity in your life, intentionally creating more positivity. Here's some other interesting facts about positivity in the research. What they find is that basically your brain functions at a higher level when you are in a more positive frame of mind. So here's some other things. It literally expands your peripheral vision. I mean, you can see more out of your peripheral vision when you are in a positive frame of mind. It expands conceptual connections and creativity. So in the work environment, are there ways you can incorporate positivity, because people are more solution focused? They can be more creative. They can be more innovative when the work environment is positive. When the work environment is negative, people don't even function at a very high level intellectually. So there's certainly a tie-in there. Make more accurate decisions. So there's a lot of different types of research here, but one of them that I find interesting is with physicians. And what they did was they took 2 groups of physicians, put one of them in a more positive frame of mind. I'll tell you how they did it in a second. But what they found was that the physicians that were put in a more positive frame of mind were able to make diagnosis more accurately and more quickly than those that were not put in a positive frame of mind. And the way they did it was through a gift of candy. And they weren't even allowed to eat the candy, okay? But through a gift of candy, they were able to put these physicians in a more positive frame of mind, and they made accurate and quicker diagnoses of patients. So I guess the takeaway there is, make sure you bring your doctor candy the next time you go in, okay? The other one is it increases interpersonal effectiveness. So here's kind of something interesting, which I think you can probably think immediately of people that you rather interact with because they're more positive than the negative Nellies that you try to avoid. But people would rather talk to someone nice over someone knowledgeable. So that's powerful when you think about the workplace. you could have the most seniority, you could be the most knowledgeable person, have all the answers at work, but if you are negative or you're miserable or you're nasty and mean, people are avoiding you. So it doesn't even matter if you have all the answers. I'm telling you, they're avoiding you. I can think of very specific examples at work where I avoided people. I mean, I think of a lady in payroll, one of the facilities that I used to work, and she scared me. This is when I first out of college, because she was so nasty. And so when I had a question about payroll, I went and talked to everybody I knew who could possibly give me the answer before I went and talked to her. And think about the inefficiency that breeds. So, real important to have a positive approach in the workplace. Question.
Yeah, so it kind of leads into the story you were just telling, although it's a little different. Do you have ideas on how to handle negativity that generates from a manager that's impacting the entire team?
Yikes. People say, oftentimes I hear, I wish my manager's in this training, and that's tough. That is a tough one. Because even if, some people get sent to my trainings, forced to come. Other people want to come, but, you can only provide information. They have to be the one to recognize it and change. I suppose you can point out some of the maybe comments that they're making that may cause, and how it impacts you, again, in a rational, calm way. Just try to, share maybe some of your experiences that you feel, aren't working. But yeah, that can be a real tough one. It can be a real tough one. And you've heard, I'm sure you've all heard the saying, people don't leave, companies, they leave managers. And oftentimes that's the reason, because the manager's so negative, creating such a negative work environment. So that's a very tough question. I guess I would say in the most rational way, calm way that you can, maybe share some of your concerns, but ultimately that person has to be the one to decide whether they're going to make a change or not. And I would also say for you, and I've been there before, at some point, is this not working for you anymore? Is it so miserable that it's impacting you personally, and then, even maybe into your personal life and stuff. So, sometimes we have to make some tough decisions, whether, what we're doing or who we're working for isn't working, and we need to do something about it, which is probably a whole nother conversation to have, but it's a reality, and sometimes we need to take a look at that if it's not healthy for us. So thank you for the question. And then finally here, it increases attention. And that's why in my classes, any type of class I do for Kent State, I like to make it as positive and as fun as possible, because it actually, people will be able to pay attention longer, and they will be able to retain the information. But this whole idea is great, for meetings, when you run meetings, starting them off in a positive way, saying, hey, let's quickly go around, what's the best thing that's happened to you since the last time we met? Or make a positive comment about the person sitting to your right or whatever, and just quickly go around and start the meeting off like that, can really help to boost people's positivity, and then they'll pay attention, and it'll be a more effective meeting. Okay. So getting now into, last one, I'm sorry, build physical health. Build physical health. So this is, that whole brain-body connection. Obviously negative emotions impact physical health, but positive ones do too. Interesting research here was they did research with Sisters of the Notre Dame, so nuns. And these nuns have since passed away, but what the researchers did was took their journals and coded them for every positive entry, every neutral entry, and every negative entry. And what they found was that the nuns that had more positive entries over negative and neutral lived an average of 10 years longer. So when we think about being healthy, we often think about eating better and exercising and, getting more sleep or whatever, and that's all important. But what's also important for longevity is building more positive emotions in your life. And it's just something that maybe we don't often consider, but it can be very, very impactful. All right. There are particular ways to do it if you're interested in knowing some of the ways, proven ways to increase positivity in your life. I'll share with you a few of them so you can maybe incorporate some of that. One is to look forward to something. That seems pretty simple, but, look forward to something, whether it's today looking forward to something, in the next week, month, year, always looking forward to something. And it can be as exciting as a vacation, or it could just be, going out to dinner with your spouse. But definitely looking forward to something. Conscious acts of kindness. Exercise is one of those things. Spending money, but not on stuff, unfortunately, but on, giving to charities, experiences, lessons, that type of thing, just creating experiences, using your strengths. There's a whole, movement on, focusing on strengths, and, utilizing your strengths can help you to be more engaged in your work, but also create a overall better quality of life in general. And then meditation is also very effective. So those are just some of the proven ways to increase positivity. Yes, a question.
Yes, so the question pertains to an office environment where the only way or most common way to get people to change behavior or respond or react is to give them brutally honest feedback. Any ideas on how to be brutally honest, but at the same time do it in a positive manner?
I don't know if you could be brutally honest, just the comment brutally honest, I don't know. But yeah, certainly there's ways to provide feedback. I think people want honesty. People want honesty. But I think you can approach feedback where you're taking a look at both what's working and maybe what can be improved. So when you're providing feedback, I think you can, let's say you're having to talk to someone about maybe being rude to a customer. And so as you work through the discussion with a person, as their supervisor, you may want to say, hey, and I think an important aspect of feedback is letting the person self-evaluate. So I like to use, so what went well? What do you think you can improve upon in this interaction with this customer? And then your turn as a supervisor would be, okay, this is what I think you did well. Here's what I think you can improve upon. And then the final step in a feedback discussion would be, what would you do differently next time? And so that way, you're being as honest as you can, but you're looking at it more holistically, both what worked, what didn't work, and giving someone the benefit of the doubt as, so next time you will do something differently. This is a kind of a teachable moment more than feedback. But I guess I wouldn't consider brutally honest correlated with positive feedback, but honesty I think is okay. But also kind of looking at the whole picture and not just focusing on what that person screwed up, and not even approach it like that, more of a teachable moment. So, but thank you so much for the question. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit into self-management. I think it's important as we look at the whole idea of self-management, or what are your triggers? Everybody has certain triggers. And what I mean by triggers are, what are those things people do or say that can send you from 0 to 60 quick? So, for example, someone rolls their eyes at you. Someone's, negative all the time. Someone blames you for something. Someone's real demanding, raises their voice, rude, cuts you off in conversation. So these are potential triggers that you may have. So it's important to identify those things. And I'll tell you why. So when we think about the whole idea of triggers are those moments where really quickly we can get amped up. And I want to just share with you the difference between your reaction to something versus your response to it, because it's kind of it's a two different concepts here. Your reaction to something, and this is how I like to think about it, your reaction to maybe a situation, I like to think of as physiological. You can't necessarily control it. So you get really angry, what happens? You turn red. Your vein pops out of your neck. You start to sweat. Your heart rate goes up. You get a pit in your stomach. Some people even start to cry. There are things that happen to your body that you can't necessarily control. However, your response to something I think of as behavioral, and you can control it. It's the words that come out of your mouth, whether you stand there and have an argument or you walk away, whether you raise your voice or not, whether you start to get agitated or you remain calm. These are behavioral responses that we can choose. Now, when you're triggered, those are really challenging times. It's very difficult to choose the right response. But what I recommend is that we have a little forethought and think, okay, I got to go meet with so-and-so, and she really irritates me. So what am I going to do when she, makes that negative comment? So and you can't do this all the time, but I would suggest that you have some idea of what you are how you're going to respond, because it's real important to make the right response. The whole idea of E plus R equals O. So the event plus your response equals the outcome. If you don't like the outcome, you need to change your response, because you can't change the event. The event being the other person, the situation. We have to be focused on our response if we want a different outcome. Now, you might notice Urban Meyer in the corner there. And the reason that I put him there, for all you Ohio State Buckeye fans, football fans, is that Urban Meyer has a book called Above the Line, and it has this formula in it. Now, this formula I was utilizing prior to reading that book, but I wanted what he talks about in his book is how he has changed the culture at Ohio State as far as the football culture, and he always prepares his guys to make the right response. So on the field, no matter what gets thrown their way, they make the right response to have the outcome they want. But he also talks about using this idea off the field. And oftentimes making the right response is the more difficult thing to do. And it just requires self-control. It requires us to manage ourselves, not get baited into something. And he talks about the whole idea of living above the line, and living above the line means that you are choosing the right response to get the outcome that you want, whether it's in football or in your personal life outside of there. So it's just a great book, just for football fans, I think, in general, unless you're a Michigan fan, I guess. But and it also talks about the whole idea of accountability in the workplace. So it's something that I definitely would recommend. So using this formula, to give you an example, so you have the event, and I like to list your triggers under the event. So someone rolls their eyes, someone's negative, someone's blames you, they don't take responsibility, they're demanding, they're rude. What would be typical negative responses? You raise your voice, maybe you avoid that person, you match their behavior, you storm off. And what would be negative outcomes? you further damage the relationship. There's no resolution to the problem. Then you got extra stress. Every time you have to work with this person, it's terrible stress. Or HR needs to be involved because of the interaction. Or, these things can happen, eye rolling, negativity, all these triggers, and here's some more positive or healthy responses. You show a little empathy, you actively listen, you ask for clarification, you remain professional. What would be positive outcomes to that potentially? You build the relationship, the conflict's resolved. You have a reputation then of being a collaborator. Just because someone does these things to us doesn't mean we have to do them back. We can choose a more positive, healthy response, and it really is our choice. So I really love this quote, and oftentimes we don't think about that. I teach customer service, or I used to teach customer service when I worked at a hospital, and I remember someone saying in the class, well, she yelled at me, so I had to yell back at her. No, that's not true. When you think about two adults arguing, they're both choosing that behavior. You are choosing to be involved in that argument. So think about that the next time maybe someone raises their voice or gets snippy or maybe says something you don't like. It really is your choice on how you're going to let that affect you. All right, so we've gotten through our personal competencies. Now we're going to take a look at our social competencies. And the first one's social awareness. You're like, oh no, what's that? I can't use my phone? What I find, and I think I mentioned it at the beginning, I think just this day and age, we're just not paying attention. We're not. There's not a time when we're actually sitting and looking up around us, especially if we're in a waiting room or waiting for a meeting to start. We're not doing that. We're so in our phones. Even if someone's talking to us directly, we might be paying attention to our phones. So, I guess one of the things that I would suggest is just put your phone down just for a little bit. When you think about back in the 80s when there were no cell phones, think about, those of you who can remember, think about meetings. Prior to meetings starting, back in the time before cell phones, what did you have to do? You sat in the meeting, you waited for it to start, and you had to sit there and actually make chit-chat with people. Those are the little moments we are missing today. Those are opportunities to develop relationships. You see someone say, oh, I heard your mom was sick. How's she doing? Or, hey, I hear you got a new puppy. What are they like? I mean, yes, it's a little uncomfortable to have to make that small talk, but those are the ways that we continue to grow and develop relationships, and I think we are missing opportunities there. And so I just wanted to kind of share that whole idea with you. The other thing about social awareness is that we need to be better listeners. Listening is certainly a skill. When we're good listeners, we're taking in information in different ways. One is, the words and the tone of voice someone's using. Another way is, the nonverbal body language people are displaying. And then we get a sense or an intuition. When we think about, we're assessing whether they're lying or they're telling the truth. Are they being authentic with us? And essentially what happens when someone's lying, or we get a sense someone's lying, it's because their nonverbal body language isn't congruent with the words that are coming out of their mouth. So we get a sense that they maybe are not being authentic. The interesting thing about being a good listener is that so the average person can speak about 180 words a minute, but the average person can comprehend 400 to 500 words a minute. So when you're thinking about being a good listener, it really is a skill. And what else is going on? So someone's talking to you at 180, but you can comprehend 400 to 500. So there can be a lot of things, other things going on in your head. And as a matter of fact, I have a polling question for you here. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to listening? Is it you want to think about, what you're going to say back? Is it, that cell phone going off in your pocket or on the table? You're just flat out not interested in what people are saying, or you're thinking about how you can end the conversation. So what would be your biggest challenge when you think about being a good listener? I'll let you answer that.
We are about 2/3 of the way through in terms of responses, and it's going to be a blowout here, Christy. We have about 82% A, thinking of my response.
Or they're just not admitting to being not interested, or how you can end the conversation. But yeah, I think that's what we typically do. So we're not really being good listeners. I mean, it does require some full attention to really listen for understanding, and it really is a challenge, but it is your go-to move as far as being a good listener. When someone's upset, whether it's at work or at home, what you want to do first is listen, not have to, not think about your response. Just listen for understanding. Once the person says yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Then you can get into sharing your perspective or working on problem solving or whatever. So listen for understanding, very key. The other thing about self-awareness, this is a change resistance identification model. I just want to share with you, when we talk about change in an organization, we have T stands for technical, P political, C cultural resistance. You'll notice this iceberg here. Technical resistance meaning, like we don't have the funding, we don't have the right equipment, maybe logistically it's an issue, but there's also politics and culture involved. And when you're socially aware, you're paying attention to the politics and the culture, because oftentimes that resistance can come, and it's like this picture here, it can be even bigger, and we need to be paying attention to the politics, the power, who's got the power in the organization, who knows who's friends with who, that type of thing. And then the culture is essentially maybe how we behave with each other. Maybe it's written down or it's not written down, but these are certain ways that we behave. So paying attention to these things, both at work and in other clubs and teams and things you're involved with, are also very important. Okay, now a couple comments, because I see we're getting closer to the end here. I do want to make a couple comments about relationship management. Essentially, here are 4 ways of responding. I'm going to give you a little example here. So let's say my husband comes home. He owns a landscape business. So let's say he comes home. He says, "Oh, honey, I just landed my biggest account ever, and it's gonna take a month to do, and I'm gonna have to work late and all of that." And so he's super excited, and my active destructive response is, "Great. Now who's gonna take the girls to volleyball, and how are we gonna get all this other things done around our house?" Essentially, someone has really good news, and your active destructive response is, you're poo-pooing all over their parade, essentially, all right? So then we have passive destructive. So passive destructive would be, he comes home, he tells me his great news, and I just say, "What do you want for dinner?" I don't even acknowledge his great news. That's passive destructive. Then we have passive constructive, which is he comes home, he tells me his great news, and I say, "Great. What do you want for dinner?" Okay, so that I'm acknowledging it just for a bit. And then active constructive response is he comes home, he tells me his great news. I say, "Oh, honey, congratulations. I know how hard you've been working on it. The proposal, tell me all about it. What did the customer say?" Essentially, I'm allowing him to live in his little moment of happiness for a little bit longer. So these are just typical ways we respond. So our polling question is, where do you, as you think about your workplace, where do you see the most often, the response that happens most often in the workplace?
All right. So as they start to trickle in, we're quite a bit more balanced this time around.
Okay.
So looks like we're gonna have a slight win for passive destructive, followed closely by passive constructive.
Okay, so I typically ask this in my class, and what people will say is they find themselves in passive constructive often, because we care, right? We care, but we got a lot to do. We got to move on. But one of the things about relationship management is when you spend time in active constructive response, you're really helping to build the relationship. If you have a relationship that's maybe not so good, or you want to build rapport with somebody, or you want to continue a great relationship you have, I would suggest spending time in active constructive response, because what does that communicate when I ask my husband questions and let him relive his good news? It communicates that I care. And so active constructive response is a really important way to show that we care. And then another idea in relationship management is this whole idea of the emotional bank account. Some of you may have heard of this before, but essentially everybody has an emotional bank account. And just like a regular bank account, you want more deposits in your bank account than withdrawals. So as in an emotional bank account, we need to be making deposits into people's emotional bank account. So how do we do that? Make a positive comment, show gratitude. We do things that person likes to do. We take responsibility. We say we're going to do something and we do it. Okay. We remember someone's name. We remember their spouse's name, their kid's name, some of their interests, and ask them about it. These are deposits. But then we have to be careful with withdrawals, because there are ways that we make withdrawals, and oftentimes we don't know we're doing it because we're so busy or distracted. But ways that we make withdrawals, what would that be? You ignore someone, you're critical, you don't follow through on a commitment, you just talk about yourself and you never ask about them, you're not interested, there's just, they say hello, you don't say hello back. I mean, there are lots of ways that we make withdrawals. So we have to recognize that we need to intentionally make deposits. So I would ask you to think about your relationships that aren't very good right now, and how often do you have a negative interaction as opposed to a positive one. There's a magic ratio here too, 5 to 1. You need 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction to have a healthy relationship. So certainly kind of take stock in that and create more positive or pleasant interactions. And then finally, because we're coming to an end here, ways to improve your emotional intelligence. I would say just continuing to develop in the area of self-awareness, paying attention to the emotions you're experiencing, also how you're communicating those emotions, observing your self-talk. Oftentimes we can lead ourselves down a negative road and we don't even realize it. We can ask for feedback. We can, work with someone, a coach, just self-reflection and journaling can also help. So definitely ways to improve your emotional intelligence just by being more aware. So with that, we've gotten through all of the content here. Any additional questions people may have for this whole topic of emotional intelligence? Overall, in closing, I just like to share that emotional intelligence is positively correlated with a lot of things with research. So it's positively correlated with better social relations, both with children and adults, better family relationships, better academic achievement, better psychological well-being, and allows you to be more self-compassionate. So there's just so many reasons to take a look at this and put some effort into trying to improve your emotional intelligence. So thank you so much for your time and attention.
All right, that concludes our time together this morning. I want to thank you again for joining us. When you exit the webinar, there will be a survey. We do ask that you complete the survey so that we can take your feedback and make appropriate changes to continue to improve. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into emotional intelligence, we encourage you to register for Christie's public program on October 24th at the Educational Service Center of Cuyahoga County, located in Independence, Ohio. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar, Making Great Decisions with Kent State Facilitator Bob Jewell, which will be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, July 23rd. If you'd like to learn more about emotional intelligence or any of the program offerings from our center, please contact us at the number below, 672-3416, or email us at yourtrainingpartner@kent.edu. Again, thanks for joining us and have a great weekend.